Okay, we're starting a birds of a feather meeting around the government-wide pattern library, and I just want to discuss that and maybe how it could be used in Drupal as a base module or otherwise. So just going to go around the room and do quick intros, um, and I'll just start it off. I'm John Radeke, work for NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and pretty much a front-end Drupal themer.
Fred Marshall, I'm a consultant contractor to the state of New York.
Cool.
I am Matt. I actually work with John at this. I'm a developer. I do backend and front.
Hey, join in. We're just going around the room introducing ourselves, and it's your turn.
I just got introductions.
Yeah.
My name is Max Sekimo. I'm with the U.S. House of Representatives.
Okay.
I'm a web developer. I've been working with Drupal for better part of the last decade.
Great.
And my name is Dan Moyer. I'm the lead front-end developer at Form 1. We do a lot of government projects in addition to our project project. And I'm the maintainer of the Jekyll Drupal theme, and I've done Drupal theming for 8 years now.
Cool.
So we do Pattern Lab for about a year now. So we were like interested in what a government-wide Pattern Library would look like.
Great. All right. So I don't have any special insight into this government-wide pattern library that 18F is building, although other than they've asked me for my input on it as someone who works at a government agency. But it just struck me as a really good fit. A lot of government agencies use Drupal. What they've built so far has a focus on accessibility features in the markup. And it looks like they have a good start to it. It's nowhere near being completed, but I would just like to start the conversation of what would be the best approach if it's a good idea to make a Drupal base theme out of what they're doing, or something else that could be incorporated into Drupal. How would that look? Like, how could that be managed? Since when I talk to them, and I'll go to their GitHub repo if I can scroll. There we go. Let me just open up their GitHub. And excuse me because I'm not the best with a PC. So here we are. Okay. So I don't know if this shows when it was started. Okay. But a few months ago. So they have a demo page up, and I'll see if I can go to that. Where's the demo page? I think it's no. Is it at the top? Their home? Is that it?
No. Yeah, pages. Yeah.
Yeah, so here it is. Here's their little demo. I'm just going to shut the door for a second. We'll leave it open in case someone wants to join in. It's not that bad. So there's not a whole lot here. They're using Jekyll to produce the markup basically, and they have this tab called Visual Style isn't really prescriptive on how the site should look necessarily, but there's sort of default colors and there's font awesome icons included as SVG. And there's some other things, typography, sort of defaults. So I thought instead of sort of going into a lot of detail, maybe talking about this idea in general, if that's interesting to anyone maybe, because I thought it could maybe save a lot of time for other agencies. So feel free to go to this page and sort of poke around on what they've done. What they did too is to get it sort of off the ground, you'll see that some of these areas are just images, and then they replace them when they have the actual code. So you can actually go in their GitHub and contribute to their markup and replace these sections. But it looks like they're making a lot of progress.
Is the goals of this project, I mean, obviously you want to provide same defaults, but does it kind of have overlap with any of the other front-end frameworks you see out there, except it's being built with like pattern lab? So what I'm getting at is, there's a plethora of front-end frameworks out there, Bootstrap, Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. With pattern lab, I know it's obviously it's less prescriptive, but do you know if like the goals of this are to just provide rough guidelines, or if it's to actually be like, here are the colors, here's what everything's going to look like. So I guess on the spectrum of like, here's a little bit versus here's a full stack front framework, where it's supposed to fall, where it's going to fall.
From looking at their GitHub issues and talking to them, I had the same question. I think some of that, the gray areas are just up for discussion right now, but I think it doesn't, they're trying to keep it as lean as possible, so they're not using Bootstrap or Foundation or other frameworks, because I guess the thinking is that this would, there would be less overwriting and a little less bloat that way, and it would build sort of each component in the most accessible, sort of government-friendly way. But so I think it's supposed to be a little lighter weight than that, and not prescribe too many dependencies. There's dependencies on the back end of it when you're generating it. They're using various SAS libraries and so forth. But as far as if someone wants to use this in their site, I think they're thinking that someone could just go in here and use one component and it would play nicely with their site because it's namespaced, whether they are using Foundation or Bootstrap or other things, but it doesn't build on one library.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, because when I look at this,
Yeah.
what it provides is what other front-end frameworks provide. You've got grids, you've got colors, you've got components. So if you look at the docs for Bootstrap or the docs for Foundation, it looks very similar to what this is.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just curious as to, again, like, what's the intent? Because, I mean, on the far end of the spectrum, you've got full-fledged front-end framework versus, normally you can have very lead. But I'm just curious if they are trying to create, like, their own government front-end framework, or if it is just supposed to be decoupled, completely standalone components.
How's this different from the Canadian web?
I think the idea is they can really recommend like a particular framework, Bootstrap, foundational as well. So we're trying to at least, come to some common ground for all the frameworks. So if you really want to build out your own theme or something, you have to pick one of the more common frameworks. So this kind of it's not a parenthesis, but basically inherits some of the most common features of the kernel. I guess that's the idea. So people don't go using some very, like no use or whatever.
I guess.
If you choose like Bootstrap or Foundation, I think it will be more base.
Yeah. So the question is like, is this a needed thing, or is this already sort of stuff that, is there any benefit to this, using this other, on top of the other frameworks, like what is better about this, So I think all this is sort of like up in the air. I think the main idea was to reduce the amount of sort of reinventing that people have to do for all kinds of sites, and the ability to take individual components out and reuse them. But I don't know. I could see a benefit in that you don't have to be sort of waiting for the next release of Bootstrap or whatever in order to use certain things. You can, especially on the accessibility side, other folks might say, well, that's just a small use case or that's not that important, but they have then this community around the pattern library would have the power to change whatever they wanted.
Yeah, I guess, and I don't mean to derail the
No.
conversation. I guess when I see this, it just looks like another. It seems like it's turning into another front-end framework.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I guess. Well, I guess it is obviously it's a pattern library. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the goals, like, because again, when I think front-end framework, I think buttons, inputs, grids, all that stuff is built out for you, versus.
I guess that's not more than style.
I don't think it's really styled enough though, because I mean, I can't imagine all the agencies using this just out of the box.
So I think, and this is just from my short conversation with them, and this is also probably up in the air for debate.
Yeah.
But I think the eventual goal is to provide some kind of default governmenty style that can be used out of the box, or like the bare bones version, a lot like base theme, sub theme kind of situations, but so you wouldn't have to use the look and feel, but for a tiny agency that doesn't have any resources, they could just take that and use that sort of styled version and maybe change the header or something like that. And it would all be accessible, kind of a nice government look. I don't know, though, I think it's up in the air how prescriptive it is. Like, say, well, every government site should have this banner at the top saying official governments. I don't know. I didn't get the sense that they were going that way, but I think it was more of an opt-in thing that you could use this or any part of it if you want. But this is sort of what people are sort of coalescing around as far as best standards.
Do you know if each of the individual, so the visual styles versus the layouts versus the elements versus the components, do they have dependencies on one another, or are they totally? So, for example, let's say you wanted to use the buttons.
Yeah.
And not any of the other stuff. Are they completely decoupled, or is it?
I think they are. Let's look at the accordion here, because I know this is one that's coded out, and so I'm looking at the markup here. It has an ID, which I probably wouldn't do, because what if you have two of them and so forth. But I think the name spacing, I'm not seeing the name spacing here because it's just called accordion menu, but it was my understanding that they're going to namespace the classes and use kind of a BEM or like BEM style naming, which would be nice because then it wouldn't, conflict.
Recent commits I've seen going through GitHub were focusing on.
Yeah. I asked that specific question and they said in a modified BEM. Maybe this just hasn't gotten finished, but it doesn't look like this one is namespaced.
They're really working on. It looks like they're doing sprints of so many, just 3 or 4 things. Sprints like
yeah, so I think we're looking at a very young stage of the project too. But I thought it'd be interesting to get people's input on what kinds of frameworks do you use for front end stuff, and do you think that there's a benefit in something like this? I don't know. What do you think, Dan? Do you think do you use frameworks like front end frameworks like Bootstrap or Foundation in your work?
So I think like the big benefit for the bigger ones, like Foundation, Bootstrap, is those are more geared for people who aren't front end developers. That don't know. They just want to pick them
Prototyping
up
and
get, plug it in, or do prototype real quick, back end development features, it totally passes on there, anything kind of works. But they're a real hassle if you're doing any custom work. So that's why we use, Catalan and basically create our own front-end framework for each project.
Yeah.
This is what buttons look like on this project. This is what, form elements look like. So I definitely think there could be some benefit if it can be used as sort of a guideline on what the markup could be, and like good examples of JavaScript.
Yeah.
For some of the accessibility stuff. But again, like some of the accessibility stuff can be real overkill for pulling it. So like, are you familiar with the Web Experience Toolkit?
Yeah.
That's the one I was just mentioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the government of Canada. It's like a starter for Drupal with like profiles, or has information profiles, or has set up like how you have markup and how you have content types, and it has theme in there, and it's like a lot of work into accessibility, but it is huge, and it's if you're not using all of it, it can really slow down your site. And so you definitely want something that you can look to as sort of guidance of what it could be and what's a good example of the markup, but you want to be able to pull only what you want, rather than being tied to this huge environment of dependencies.
Have you used the Web Experience Toolkit,
We
Greg?
looked at it, we looked at ACO, we looked it up in public, because we're in the middle of defining a distribution for the state of New York. So, how are we going to build sites? And that's why when this popped up about 3 or 4 weeks ago, when I first heard about it, and I was like, okay, subscribe to GitHub, let's see what's going on.
Yeah.
And, but I would see that it would be implemented in a very similar way. They're doing something with a theme, basically. It's doing the majority of the integration. The rest of the WebKit Drupal distribution really is surprisingly, compared to OpenPublic or eGov, there are no content types, there are no views to speak of, there are a couple of sample views, but there's really very little. It truly is a toolkit. It's not a distribution like the other two are, where you can, the Australian governments are using eGov literally in an Accordion site factory instance, so you don't have any options outside of the distribution. And they're spinning up sites.
Well, what would be the ideal setup, do you think? How would this be useful, if at all?
I think if you follow this practice of Drupal and use one of the more common themes implemented with Bootstrap, I think it will reach 90% of the way. What are you trying to do? This would be helpful if you're trying to start with a very variable theme in Drupal. It doesn't really describe anything. Like Zen, for example, very really work well, with patterns and buttons and all that. So I guess this would be helpful if you start from scratch. If you're following one of the distributions that are out there, I think you follow this practice that distribution describes. For us, we are using a distribution that was a predecessor of OpenPublic, and we still have like some sites on that, but what we did was we used it for a couple of years, and then we decided to roll our own based on whatever our needs were. And we spent a few months developing it in-house, and we built out all the features we needed. But it was very custom. It was actually very custom for our needs. It serves us well. It's just not applicable to other agencies. And we've been maintaining it for two distributions for the past 5 years. And again, the first one was based on was then? It was Ruby or something. It was like one of the base themes for like Drupal 7, and the one we rolled out it was based on the Mac. So we got responsive, we got lots of stuff that fixes IE issues. We still have to support it for a while.
Yeah.
And we had a base theme, and then for wherever on each we had like 3 or 4 sub themes, and we had a theme library to those themes. And then if anyone needed a custom theme, we basically say, hey, which theme you like better, and it's just something either that one or just something. This kind of provided us with a lot of flexibility. If we needed to, theme certain things certain way, we do that. Also allowed us to roll outside very quickly. Something's needed, we do it. Stand up aside overnight and get it ready. Or we just provide the content, make sure it's looks good and all that. That's it. At the same time, we do have customers that require not a lot, but a substantial amount of customer functionality and for integration or something. And for them, we basically, since we know our distribution, we can deliver custom solutions. But there's
So you had to at some point roll your own,
Yeah.
So like the frameworks didn't get you there and the distributions didn't get you there.
We evaluated. Probably was the first contender, I guess, because it doesn't really assume anything, but you still have to do a lot of things from all people.
Yeah.
And that's even more helpful. Some of the things we want. Open public also, it does certain things well, but for our needs, we have to override a lot. That wasn't kind of overarching, or that was a theme along the way. You start with something and then you spend like more time overriding things than actually building your stuff.
Right.
That was not a good thing. So I think this style library is good in a way that it doesn't assume anything. You don't really have to override anything. You start from it and then you just build on top of it. Whereas if you take some of the other ones, it's just a lot of crop you have to remove, I guess, before you get to the point where you start building your own stuff.
It almost seems like the value in the Drupal theme side would be the ripping out and the putting in of better markup is like doing the heavy lifting on the template side, and then like not much CSS that style that's really the visual style, just enough to get it working. But I mean, because you have like things like Mothership that just rip out as much as and then you kind of have to sort of add your own things. But I mean, in a sense, Drupal theming is all about overriding. I mean, that's how it sort of works in Drupal 7 at least. But so yeah, I don't know. Because I started doing a pattern lab based style guide for Nest, and then I learned about this. I'm like backing up, thinking maybe this is something we should piggyback on. So I'm not sure personally where like my entry point is into this or how I could really leverage it, because this is not built on Pattern Lab, to be clear. So Pattern Lab I think comes in a couple of varieties. There's one that you can use Node, but the main one is PHP based, I believe, and then and it comes with some sort of front end niceness about clicking the different browser widths and viewing the code and stuff like that. And they've done their own, I guess they've used sort of Jekyll, things that come with Jekyll, which is sort of, I think, a GitHub kind of GitHub pages sort of tool. But anyways, that would probably be sort of beside the point for making a Drupal theme. You'd have to do all that in templates, I suppose. But yeah.
What are the themes for Drupal 8 now?
For Drupal 8?
Yeah.
Which ones have been ported?
The big ones. I mean, which ones are being heavily developed? Which ones are actually doing?
I know Zen has a Drupal 8 version.
Sorry, what was the question?
I wanted to know which one of the more popular themes are actually making. How they make it.
Well, they're having to completely rewrite it.
Are they being completely rewritten?
Well, you have to because it's Twig.
I know. changing what they do in terms of, you know, the CSS, classes, markup, and all that? And are they going to support some of the other things, such as
In Drupal 7 or Drupal 8?
Drupal 8?
Well, in Drupal 8, it's going to be a lot easier to get whatever markup you want. Like, do something like this. So, like, the Drupal 7 bootstrap theme have to do a lot with the markup. And the theme we created yesterday, we had to do a lot to get the markup that we want. You know, and Drupal 8 is actually a lot easier. So we can very easily just say you don't get any styles at all from 4. That's it.
Warren
You don't get any.
was heavily involved in Drupal 8.
He did.
The mothership.
Yeah, he did the mothership, didn't he?
So
And
his
then
goal is to
Strip it down, which is the thing, I guess.
so I guess what would be the? I mean, is there a problem with how government rolls out Drupal in a markup sense, or just like pain points that a theme or something based on the pattern library could sort of alleviate?
I think one thing that will make everyone's lives easier if we have some of more in common in terms of how we do Drupal. Because, you know, Drupal is very flexible. You know,
Yeah.
everyone just goes down their own path, and if you need to hire a vendor or
That's where I think the Australians are doing a really interesting job.
you're just following one standard, that's not.
They've standardized their distribution. They basically said, although it's interesting because it's a promotional, not dictatorial approach. So we'll help you develop your site faster
If you follow this.
because we'll give you the resources to do it.
And that helps a
We
lot.
won't require, but we also have some requirements as a government now that says you have to follow certain design guidelines. So the analogy to what New York State's doing is so similar that you can start to talk to the Australians directly because it really is similar. So we have, New York State has a style guide. Every state agency's website have to meet at some point. There's a mandate to move all state agency websites to Drupal. There's no requirement that you use the core development team, but you're going to get less and less support from ITS, which is the centralized IT.
So you haven't finalized your distribution yet.
I personally think we're 3 to 6 months away. They keep making noises like they want to start building the reusable components already. At the same time, they have procurements out, purchasing a relatively good sized hourly engagement to help validate the architecture.
So it just seems like a common problem that everyone has. I know NIST has it, that you need some kind of guidelines or some kind of toolkit for your agency. I know NIST specifically has any number of, ways of making sites and applications. So there's Drupal, there's, Python, there's straight up HTML, there's all kinds of stuff, Ruby on Rails. So my thought was, well, if we did the pattern lab way, then we could at least give that to various groups and say, you got to at least make an effort to follow the style of NIST. And that's kind of more on the design side, really, but also here's some snippets if you need to know how to create these things. But your site should pretty much look like it's in this family. Like, is there any, so what's a government-wide kind of solution and what's an agency solution?
I think it would be nice to have something like BuildKit for the government. Have you guys heard of BuildKit? It's something that was developed by one of DC firms like 8 years ago or so. It was for Drupal 6. It was developed by Dependencies. Unfortunately, they quit Drupal like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And Drupal Themes were the original creators of features module. And what they did was they specified the build kit is just specs. It's nothing else. That specs allows you to then build your features, your modules, and so on and so forth. And what BitKit does is it tells you what modules you're going to use for your purpose. It'll say, okay, we're going to use features modules for exporting our configuration, for example. And they'll say, okay, we're going to follow following standards for naming things. If you have for example, a list of things, you'll call events, like their listing page, and then individual event that will live under events slash where build kit. Yeah,
What build kit?
that's it. It's very famous.
Is it Drupal related?
Oh yeah, it's like I said, it's like a spec for how you build stuff out, like features. You need to name it this way. You need to kind of it's guidelines.
I think it's just a. If you scroll up, there should be specifications.
Build kit documentation?
If you go back in like when you search for when you Google it,
Okay.
I think the one after was kit right there. Yeah.
Whoa.
You can open up there's a feature specification and theme specification.
Okay, so let me do the feature.
If you increase mark,
Yeah. Okay, so feature. This is about how to create features and what to use it in the naming or what the scope is.
Yes, but it's kind of a guideline for naming things, guideline for the mark.
Kit. Okay.
It's guideline for which modules you're going to use, which user roles and permissions you're going to use.
I remember bookmarking this to come back to it.
This was very useful, but then the DevSeed quit. They started doing their Mapbox thing and they're doing all node-based development. They don't do Drupal anymore for the last 5 years.
These two took over their district, so I wonder if this
Yes,
is
Open Atrium was used to be Atrium back in the day. Now it's Open Atrium. See, they specify modules they're going to use for certain things and what settings they're going to use for each module. If you go with this will get you, I don't know, halfway towards making things common for everybody.
Yeah.
And then if you go with the other half, which is there's theme specification.
So is there how is that different from a distro? Do they have or can you run the what is it called? The file that downloads all the make file.
Yeah, we do have a make file, so we do have automated builds and all that. So when I, for example, patch something out, new build is generated. And if I, for example, patch out Drupal.org.name, then it's going to actually rebuild the whole thing or that particular line.
Well, I think Kit itself is just a spec documentation. It's not like it's no make file. It's nothing like that. It's just a spec.
I see.
So.
And if you look at theme, you will see theme related stuff.
Okay, so naming and
usually left or right.
When I was looking at the features one a while back, and I only glanced at it, I think the thought, or what I took away from it, was how to build reusable features, how to build features that don't collide with one another.
That was, that's what I was doing research on, because you've got features, you've got the kit, there's that group called apps.
Yeah.
There seems to be another one called debut.
Yeah, debut is actually built on top of,
Right. They all seem, and it's interesting that, it looked like there was some momentum towards the sort of apps approach to it, and then the massive backlash when you're reading the blog posts about this whole approach to apps and how dare people think about trying to sell something in this, and it was just funny because, and then it sort of like went away. So it's almost like rather than fight the political battle, they just decided not to not to progress it any further.
There are two things related to apps. One was this very commercial interest where Facebook tried to push their apps to just their app store kind of thing. But apps provide a very useful technical solution to a problem where you need multiple modules with certain settings to be enabled just by a click, provide a certain functionality. That's what apps really provided, out of the box for you.
Sort of like what features was supposed to be, or
Well, from what I can tell from every app I've looked at, when you actually crack it open, there's features files sitting there. So they're almost all created with features. So it's sort of like, it's like a wrapper around the feature that then extends it just a little, not a whole lot.
Yes, just a little bit of this code that automatically downloads like the required modules and just settings, and that's about it. But then they kind of went wild with this, you have to download from App Store or whatever, and it's everyone's like, we don't want that stuff.
It's like a distribution for just one part, like
yeah.
a feature.
Sub-distribution.
Yeah, it's like
whatever you want to call it.
yeah.
So, like, how am I going to solve my problem in my agency? If other people are spinning up Drupal sites, that I don't necessarily support myself.
As long as they're compliant with this, I think, whatever you come up with.
Yeah.
I think you offer to help.
And how do I make it easy as possible for us to all be in a similar page? And
what we're using right now, until we get something more formal here, is we have big files we share. So every time someone's bringing on a new site, we offer advice. We offer someone to ask questions to, because that's a big issue. And usually it's what modules are you using? It's like, okay, here's a make file. It doesn't actually install any of the modules, but we've got what we call base install, which are the modules we've already vetted to a level where we're comfortable enough to say, and then we spent about 4 months last fall as much doing education as actual results, because I'm not certain the results were completely valid. But we did something called Module Monday. And every Monday morning for an hour, we had 6 modules that popped up that teams went out. And so we had an accessibility team, a documentation team, a issues team, and what ended up calling the search team, but it was sort of the people who went out and said, what else is out there that Google can find about this module that isn't in the module directory? And a code team. And so the code teams actually did like PA reviews on the code, which is fascinating because most of the major modules fail PA review miserably.
so we have 5 minutes left, and I'm trying to. Oh yeah, okay. Good luck.
Yeah.
So if we could give feedback to this project, like on how it could be useful to agencies, or what would make it useful, like what would that look like? I mean, I suggested that if they work toward eventually releasing versions, that other implementations could then follow that more closely, because as it stands, it's just GitHub issues closing and then commits. So like, how would a Drupal theme follow all that? It might be tricky. I guess you would just do its own sort of line of releases based on the last commits it incorporated. I don't know.
With the 18 app, I would look at the way the Canadians are doing WebKit, because it's based on an external JavaScript CSS library.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a feeling that however they're doing it is a pattern of what you might want to look at, and how to keep doing it. I'm a huge believer. I was taught this in Cub Scouts. It's called CASE, which stands for copy and steal everything.
Yeah.
Never reinvent anything you can adapt from someone else.
Thanks.
Sorry to run.
No.
And what's your name? Matt. And you're with Mist, right?
Yep.
And
John
John.
Nist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
You can look me up on the BOF. Yeah.
I couldn't find it. I didn't know that I can look people up on BOF. So
Maybe the name is not clickable, but I'm.
I think
Yeah, if you click, under the title, if you click my name, John Radeke, you can find me there. If you
oh, okay.
contact
But
me,
I can see everybody who signed up as well.
no, not that I know of.
Yeah, I'm speaking on Thursday.
I'll be here all week.
Okay, yeah. Did you have any advice? Like what?
I think for me, it just depends on what the goal, who's the audience of it.
Yeah.
Like, is it for people who don't have capability, don't have the budget to do their own styling?
Well, what do you think should be? What do you think should be the audience? So I keep asking them the same questions. They're like, I don't know. What do you think? So everyone's kind of.
Well, I think there's a lot of suboptimal design work out there. So
It's a problem.
if you already know how to do SaaS and design and all that stuff, you're probably not going to be using this anyway. I mean, or maybe you will, but I mean, it almost seems like if you make it too lean, what's the point? Because if you're just going to be writing your own styles or doing your own styles anyway, then I mean, you probably want to use this. Or if you don't have any design expertise, then you're going to need all the help you can get. So again, I hate to say it, but the SaaS versions, I'm going to say Foundation. If you look at the SaaS version of Foundation, it's pretty decoupled. I mean, the Drupal Foundation theme, I'm guessing they're building releases off of Foundation as it's released.
So it would be sort of your preference to say, look, let's just pick one. Let's pick Foundation and go from there.
Not to build on top of Foundation, but it seems like this is going to be another competitor. To me, when I look at it, it seems like another front-end framework.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's the two big ones are Bootstrap and Foundation. They already have Drupal themes out there. So, again, follow how they're doing things, both in Drupal and otherwise. Again, using SAS files, making it decoupled so that if you only want bits and pieces of the framework, you can comment that out when you do your builds, or if you want to override the settings, have a settings SAS file. Again, the way I see it, it looks a lot like it's going towards that versus going towards, the kind of very lean Power Lab approach. So.
You guys are more front end development, right?
No, he's back in
Well,
full stack.
I hate to sound like that, but full stack. So.
Yeah.
Front end, yeah.
I work on that. I don't do design of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I do get to select like what kind of model doing, what we're gonna use for the back end, and that dictates a lot of things that are possible to do on the team later.
I think a lot of the talk about the make files and the prescriptions about modules and stuff is probably out of the scope of this, which would be focused on platform agnostic.
I disagree. If you look at the kit, it consists of two things. Remember, one was the feature specs, and the other one is the theme specs.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we backend guys can focus on backend. You front-end guys can focus on the theme specs. And when you say, okay, we're going to use themes, you can say, okay, these are regions we're going to use, or these are standards we're going to follow. And if we combine all of them, then we'll come up with a distribution that it's kind of
Greg.
It's kind of, which is kind of better,
Yeah.
It's like, and we know how to work with it, and everybody knows. And when a vendor comes that has been working with you guys, they can start working with us. Or if someone has been building sites for us, they can easily go to you guys and start building sites for you, because sometimes you need help. Sometimes you need to hire someone to build something big.
But as we sit here now, there is no standard.
There's no standard. I mean, and Drupal is super flexible. You can just do anything you want. But with something like this, I can try doing something that's more distribution related or module related. You guys can focus on something that's front end related.
What if we made a new GitHub project and said, you know, this is to contain, you know, this kind of kit idea, also playing off of this pattern library.
Great.
And then we can just like just get the community into it and start building this thing out. Drupal specific prescriptions that could be used government wide.
That would be great because people actually go start building like their distributions, and they're great because they solve problems for their company or their organization because you have your own distribution, you basically know your distribution well, and it's specific to your needs and you can do whatever you want. And then again, others can't really do much with that. And Apple is probably one of the better ones because it tries to be very agnostic and base. But even then, they don't really specify how they're doing things. And probably what happened is they were like very quick in the very beginning. You started using some of the not themes like the modules or something, and then changes immediately. And then that breaks up your stuff because they did a lot of refactoring. Because first thing, when they started, they had a very monolithic design for Apple.
Mm-hmm.
Slowly, they kind of branched everything out into their own modules and all that. But even then, it's more of a product than a standard. And I think we're sorely lacking a standard that allow us to build these kick-ass products.
Okay, I think we should wrap up. Did you have any thoughts? And moving forward, is there anything that is this an effort that would have value, or just maybe it's just another one of those things out there that not a few people will use and someone's going to have to maintain and so forth?
Right. Yeah. So like the one thing I'm always kind of skeptical of like distributions and some of these kind of frameworks is that the technology changes so fast. Like the best practices change so fast, and you have something that's sort of stagnant and hard to maintain. Like so, like at Wormon, like a couple years ago, we had like our own distribution cookies and stuff. And like the things that we change so often, like WYSIWYG setting, like how we set up, solar circuit integrations, like it evolves a lot quicker than you can basically keep up the distribution that is effective for whatever you want. And the same thing with the front-end development. Like even like Bootstrap and stuff, it's not necessarily the best practice. How you would, if you knew what you were doing, what you would do. So one thing that could be helpful is if it was somehow a good guide on what the best practices are that kept up with the latest stuff. But you end up having a bit for backwards compatibility for that. So like with theming, that's why with for the Jekyll theme, we use it as a starting theme. It's not a base theme. So if you update something, it's gonna break. So you just use it as a starting point for your project, and
you fork it.
Right. Yeah. So that way we can always keep up to date on whatever the latest practices are.
That's a good point. So I might just create a project, and then we'll just, if you guys feel like adding comments, I'll just probably make it a discussion sort of at first, and then if we want to start putting something in there, we can. Or, just going to the pattern library that they're building now to kind of nudge them in a certain direction or add to that discussion, because there's a lot of activity there. I don't want to make some separate thing.
And what it'll
Yeah.
It'll be very easy to follow whatever they are recommending, I guess.
Yeah.
You could open up some RFCs on the pattern lab or pattern library 18.1.
Yeah.
So like in GitHub, like a lot of projects, a lot of RFCs, where it's basically I think it's added an issue or pull request, where it's just the whole purpose is no one's actually but RFC where you get a discussion about that. Request for comments section of this project.
Okay.
Request for comments, how much of this project enforced or whatever.
Okay. Well, yeah, to be continued. That's interesting. Lunch is now, so let's go get lunch, and I'll stop recording here.